Welcome to The Real and the Woo. I'm your host, Laurie Stern. Join me as I invite experts and friends to discuss a range of topics, from the factual and practical to the mystical and magical. Consider this your virtual happy hour filled with lively, authentic, and meaningful conversations meant to inform, inspire, and ignite your curiosity. Whether you are very real or super woo, this podcast is just for you. Welcome to The Real and the Woo. I'm your host, Laurie Stern, and I'm sitting down today with Jori Houlihan, who is a newly minted podcaster herself. So we're going to get to that. Congratulations on your show.
Thank you.
And I'm lucky enough to have been invited to be a guest on your show, and I can't wait for that episode to come out. And I met Jori through a networking group that we're both in for women founders, women in business. And it's fantastic. And I've met so many wonderful people, and you were one of them. And so, I want to set you up a little bit. Jori is your guide for the dopamine deprived. I love that. She's an ADD life coach, public speaker, and educator who specializes in working with women diagnosed later in life. After living with undiagnosed ADHD until the age of 49, she brings a deep understanding of the unique challenges, strengths, and perspectives that come with late discovery. And she's the host of a new podcast, like I said, ADHD and ... with Jori Houlihan. I love the ... So I want to get right into that ... because I want to connect with you on what you've discovered and determined so far about the benefits and the hidden gifts of a late diagnosis or any diagnosis with ADHD.
Well, thank you for having me. This is really great. That's a really great question. Initially, after I was diagnosed, I went through a bit of a grieving period because you kind of think about all the things that could have been, and it wasn't really even until after I started taking medication. I didn't do medication right away. I naively thought that now that I knew what it was, I could totally handle this on my own. I don't need any of this stuff, which was definitely not the case. And so I did start medication, and that's when I really understood how big of a difference there was between what I had been living with and what everyone else had been living with. I was like, oh, so I've been living with my hands tied behind my back and not realizing it. Okay. But once I got past that, then I was able to really start to see where my strengths were. I will tell you, all people with ADHD, in my opinion anyway, are creative problem solvers. You don't have to be creative artistically, but we're out of the box thinkers about most things. And I think that is a real gift. That's a gift to just your own life, because you can just see things from other perspectives that maybe other people don't. You can problem solve more efficiently. I jokingly tell people, if you've been trying to solve a problem and you've been using logic, give it to me, because my brain just doesn't kind of ignores the logic and is like, okay, let's try this. And very often I, come up with something, a good solution for something. And something else that I think is a really big gift for us is that we are very empathetic people. I think partially because we know what it's like to live with something that's invisible and that people don't get. And I'm always going to err on the side of making sure somebody doesn't feel alone. And that is in part one of the reasons I started the podcast, actually, was for people who are trying to figure this out and they feel really alone in all of this. You do have gifts. You just have to figure out what they are for you. And now that I better understand what hyperfocus is, I have been able to learn how to kind of work it a little more in my favor. So I actually can get a lot of things done that I couldn't do before. And I have an amazing sense of humor. I think you have to have that when you have ADHD.
So people who know me know that I call myself the funniest person I know, right? So I wanted to circle back. So it's like, before and after, prior to your diagnosis and then choice for medication and going down that path to after, were you able to see clearly how you had been a human operating prior to, and then the human operating after. And so, if you'd like to share some of those things, because you know what? There's a whole space of menopause for women our age, a little
Mhm.
younger, a little older, where now the menopausal umbrella is being covering
Yes.
ADD, ADHD stuff. And so that's fascinating too. So, I can't speak to the hormones. I can't speak to that. However, for anybody out there who's listening to this that might hear the following symptoms you're going to describe that were the first version of yourself versus this version of yourself, I'd love you to sort
Yes.
of highlight some of those if you'd like to.
Sure. So my entire life, I only got things done if I felt a huge amount of pressure to get them done. Like the minute a teacher would say, "This is not a term paper you can do last minute," I was like, "Yeah, watch me." But I would
Hmm.
always be optimistic in the beginning. Yeah, I'm not going to wait till the last minute this time. I'm not going to wait. And then as time went on, I'm like, "Yeah, I'm waiting till the to the last minute."
So, like
Eh,
procrastination, you would say? Okay.
Procrastination to like but to like a pretty far extent, like that, or I would have to almost be panicking to get it done. Or if I was really interested in it, that would change that perspective a little bit. Then I would maybe work on it sooner. But again, like once the dopamine runs out, right? Once it becomes kind of boring or monotonous, my brain's like, okay, what else can I do? And looks for the, shiny objects. I really struggled with executive functioning in terms of, and that is kind of part of the procrastination, but my working memory is not great. I have terrible out of sight, out of mind, which just like if I have if I have a bill and I set it on my desk and something gets set on top of it and I don't move that anytime soon, I will completely forget that bill exists. I learned very early on that I had to put everything in my calendar because if I don't, that appointment does not exist. And
Wait, stop you 1 second right there. So,
yeah.
calendars. I'm a huge writer of things in my
Mhm.
calendar, because I was just on your show as a guest, although people haven't heard, we connect on so much of this. I'm also a late bloomer with my diagnosis, undiagnosed as a child, and I'm really loving everything you're saying because I want to get back to that too. But the tactile I learned by doing that connects those synapses for me when I write it down.
Yes.
And I've been really afraid to just put everything on my phone, but of course, I'm putting everything on my phone, but I'm typing it in there, I guess, so it matters, but I still have to remember to go look at it versus, like,
Yeah.
seeing it. So it's different. So it's not like my husband trying to find the mustard and all he has to do is move the
Sorry.
dressing. You physically put something on top of a bill and you forget about it. Like, that's different.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, leftovers, like I have to put them in a clear container and they have to be in the center row of the fridge. Otherwise, I will never think of them again until
Ah.
they smell. So, yes, that was a big aha for me when I discovered that one. And we've saved so much money because I actually eat my leftovers now. Same with like veggies and stuff. I don't have them in the crisper where they go to die. I have them up front center so that I'm more likely to eat them. So,
My friend puts them in beautiful glass jars with water. Not all vegetables, but it really is a nice way to display, see it, and also keep them fresh. Just FYI.
yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea. Tell me
You
you
were
have
talking
ADHD.
about your executive functioning
Oh,
and how
yes.
that was manifesting for you.
Yeah, so if you give me verbal instructions, forget about it. I will not be able to retain that. I have to write everything down, and that kinda goes back to what you were saying actually about, that fear of having everything digital, because digital really puts things into out of sight, out of mind unless you have a gazillion reminders that come up or things, and then that can be a distraction. I am a hybrid person. I have a written calendar and I have a digital calendar. The written calendar is one that I have to do every week and I need it. I love it because it forces me to look at my digital calendar and to make sure that I have everything the way it should be. Like this week, I discovered that somebody who I interviewed today was also on the schedule to be interviewed on Thursday. And I was like, well, that can't be right. So, I was able to get that worked out kind of thing. So it forces me to slow down and really think about where my time is being spent, et cetera. But when it was just like, when it was all digital, I have reminders that come up, which is
Mhm.
good. And that's the only main reason I have digital anything is for my appointment reminders, as far as that's concerned. Because even on my computer, my brain will tune out like the little things that come up. And so there's an app called In Your Face. It's for Macs, and it will literally just block out my entire screen. And it's like, you have this appointment right now. Like,
Oh, I like that. I'm going to write that down, in your face, which is
Yes.
funny because a lot of time people with our diagnosis are described as being too in your face because we're a lot. We have a lot of energy. We have a lot
We do.
to say. We have a lot of energy to get things done, like you said, and especially when we like what we're doing. So as a child, undiagnosed, I would procrastinate and then the tears would come. I would be up until 3 o'clock in the morning finishing a paper. And thank
Yep.
goodness I was a good writer. I still am. It's one of my joys. But I have a friend who I've been friends with since kindergarten. Her name is Babs. And my mom and her husband at the time went to Vegas for some, I don't know, trip. And we had an AP English paper due and we drank, stayed up way too late, wrote the paper, no tears because we had been drinking. And I got an A and she got like a D. And I felt so bad about it, but I was like, oh my God. And I have a picture of her like with pens in her ears and like holding her mouth because she's spitting out her alcohol because we're laughing so hard. Yeah. So anything to get stuff done also, I would imagine is part of the gift
Yeah.
of sort of learning how to pivot, learning how to work with your diagnosis, but understanding where you came from.
Yes.
The thing about the digital is, we have no phones at the table, like it's a no phone zone, or when you're out at a restaurant, when you're trying to have a conversation with your spouse or your friends. I do check my phone, and to the untrained eye, it would look disrespectful or rude. But if I'm remembering that I might have forgotten something, I need to look, or I'm going to
Yeah.
forget to look again.
And I'm no longer listening to that person that's talking because that's what I'm thinking about. I do the exact same
Exactly.
thing. I do the
Yeah.
exact same thing. I will have to say, I'm really sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I just remembered something. I want to make sure I'm not missing this other thing. Let me just check this really
Yes.
quick so I can listen to you fully. That's what I've learned to do. I used to feel so bad about it, but now I'm like, but I'm not being respectful to them if I don't do that because, like I said, I'm not listening anymore.
Right.
So yeah, I totally, totally get that.
Yeah.
Um,
The way you said you had to write things down too, what's coming up is relationships.
mhm.
Men are for Mars, women are from Venus, we hold all that. But how about your spouse has ADHD and you don't? How do you communicate? And how did you notice there was a shift? I don't know if you were married before, um, but if you can talk about that, because I'm thinking now about when my husband talks to me, he can kind of tell when I'm starting to go squirrel because it's too much information. I have to write it down. And I do
Mhm.
pride myself on being a good listener. I just don't retain. There's certain things I
Yes.
don't retain. And the writing down really does help. So have you had to navigate your relationships a little differently at home, at work, with your kids, with your friends?
Yeah. So my husband, I actually think my husband does have ADHD, but his undiagnosed OCD-ish tendencies tend to overshadow that. So he'll start
Mm.
something and actually finish it. One of my other signs when I was younger is the hobby graveyard. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like, oh, and I absolutely thought I was going to do this for the rest of my life. He has better learned what ADHD is. He's starting to see because both my kids have it as well. So he's kind of
Oh,
outnumbered if he doesn't have it.
right.
But
We're
it's
half
all
and
over.
half over here.
It's all over his side of the family. Like if
Yeah,
he, yeah, it's like it's there.
mine too.
But for people who, if you are in a relationship where one of you has it and the other one doesn't, I think the hardest thing for the people who don't have it to understand is that the person is not doing whatever it is that's bothering you. They're not doing it on purpose. Like sometimes it's random little things. Like it used to drive my husband crazy that I would leave cabinet doors and drawers open. I didn't even
Oh
notice I was doing
no.
it. And it drove him crazy. And I was like, okay, well, I'll try to remember, but I don't even know I'm doing it. And I only have so much bandwidth in a day. Is that what you want me spending it on?
Shocked. You could see my mouth. And that you can't leave a cabinet open in my kitchen. And I have a friend of mine, but she was a babysitter at the time. One time I came home and she had all the cabinets open because she knew how much it made me crazy. But how do you not see that, Jorie?
I don't. And, I would joke, I'm like, well, see, but if it's already open, then I don't have to think about what's in there. And a lot of people with ADHD struggle with this. Now, there's lots of theories. Some people think it's because of out of sight, out of mind that sometimes people honestly can't remember which things they have in what cabinets. I don't know. But I think it's also just we get distracted by something else and we just walk away, right?
Mm.
And so I got better about it, but then my kids started doing it. So I was like, I'm sorry, honey, you're just kind of, this is one you're going to have to live with. So,
Yeah. Like,
um,
pick your battles, just
yes.
close the cabinet. But yeah, that's, you're bringing up a lot of symptoms I have never considered. So keep going, please. I love
Oh,
this.
sure. Um, Jerry lives with three people who don't see their messes and he sees all of them. That's always been a big area where we've had to have some guardrails in place because
Mhm.
I can't really stand visual clutter either. But at the same time, with my executive dysfunction, I can't always get myself to declutter the things that are
Mm.
in my immediate purview. And if you go into his office, there's piles everywhere.
Mm.
So I'm like, okay, that was the first thing that made me go, maybe he does have a little ADHD, but he doesn't like other people's clutter. That is actually quite common. If my kids leave clutter laying around, I'm like, dude, come on, put your stuff away. In part because I'm tripping over it too. But I also have my own, I definitely have clutter and like the social bandwidth too. So I am an extroverted introvert, right?
Mhm.
Like when I'm out, I love being out. I love being around people that energize me, but I also have so much bandwidth in a day for that. And then sometimes it will take me like a day to kind of recover if it was a long day with friends or whatever. And he does because he always has to be moving. He's always doing something. He's actually sick today and he doesn't know what to do with himself because I'm like, you actually have to rest. And he doesn't know how to do that. But I often what happens, and you may relate to this, is I will have a day where I am like super productive, man. I am knocking it out of the park. I'm getting this done and that done and da 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 da. But then I am out of commission for like 2 days after.
So describe like out of commission, because I don't want, maybe it is depression, but like out of commission to me is like you're in the bed, the blinds are drawn, like you're not
Oh,
doing anything.
no, I just don't have energy. I just don't have a lot of energy. And so I end up kind of either not doing a lot of work related things. I spend more time doom scrolling or just, doing something other than work because my brain is like, we're burned out. We need space from this. And it is one of the things that I teach my clients is you have to really understand what your energy patterns are because that does make a big difference in terms of your productivity but also how you feel. So I now know that if I take breaks, now people with ADHD hate taking breaks because we're afraid we won't go back to what we were working on. But I put together a framework that actually does help with that so that you're more likely to go back. And when I do take regular breaks on a day where I also happen to be really productive, my recovery time from that is much less. And usually, even by the next day, I'm okay. But if I don't, and I just kind of work straight through because I have to do it while I have the motivation because I don't know when this is going to come back and I want to do it now because that kind of thing. That's why we're afraid of taking breaks. And I will get like that. So I still sometimes now, and I'm like, I'll ignore my timer. I'm like, what are you doing? Stop ignoring the timer. You know what's going to happen if you do that. So if I take regular breaks throughout the day, I feel better the next day than I would if I didn't take those breaks.
That makes sense. I mean, I don't manifest in the same way you do. I can take a break and come back to something. Now, the break might be longer than I intended. Like I just did it this morning. I'm going on a trip. I want to
Yeah.
buy a pair of waterproof boots, probably have some, but I'm like, I want different ones. So, I'm on this tab, I'm that tab. And now I'm going to be late for the thing I have to do.
Yeah.
So so that's what happens to me is I have a good idea, even if it's something I'm writing or a program I'm creating or stuff that came up about a client, I want to get an email out to him or her. I'll put other things in the way and spend maybe a little too long doing those things, and I'm always late. More than I'd like to be, but it's my own
Yes.
fault because I've just like I have to get one last thing done before I leave the house. Yeah.
Time blindness is brutal. Time blindness is, well, there's three different aspects of it. One is that we just don't feel time passing, or we don't feel it passing the way neurotypical people do. And so if we're really interested in something, 45 minutes will feel like five, right?
Mhm.
If we're not so interested in it, 5 minutes is going to feel like 45. And
Mhm.
we just don't have a way of regulating that. ADHD is in large part a self regulation struggle. We can't always regulate where our attention goes. It's actually, we don't have a deficit. We actually have a surplus. Again, we can't always regulate where it goes. And same with feeling time passing and our emotions as well. That's why we have emotional dysregulation. Another aspect of time blindness is that we struggle to estimate how long things will take. We generally speaking tend to underestimate how long things will take. I call that time optimism, where we're like, oh, this will just take 10 minutes. And then an hour and a half later, you're like, oh, that ate up most of my day. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's because if you give a mouse a cookie syndrome,
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
might take 10 minutes, but while you're walking to get it done, now you're cleaning up the pile and now you're making another cup of coffee and now you're checking for the boots and blah, 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 blah. And then,
Yes.
oh, now it's 30 minutes later, right?
Yes. And that
Yeah.
is definitely sometimes part of it. And sometimes it just takes longer than you thought it would.
Yeah.
And then the last part of it is that we can't see the future, meaning that like long-term planning can be a very big struggle because our brain just can't get there. So a lot of people with ADHD, they struggle with like saving for a house, saving for retirement, because that is just such a far thing down the road. And so in the ADHD world, time usually is broken down to there's now and there's not now, and not now doesn't exist. Retirement is way down in not now land, right? And so if you also have poor working memory, so you forget you're saving for something, and you have impulse control issues, right? So you're going to be more likely to spend money on something that is not going to go towards that goal because you've already forgotten what that goal is because it's way down the road, that kind of thing.
So a couple of things. This is fascinating. Impulsivity plays a role in this diagnosis, right? Risk taking. So I'm hearing, but I'm also wondering, it must be really hard to parse out between an impulsive person and someone who, as you're describing, has like time blindness or future forgetfulness. They're not unable to save. They just know they have this chunk of money and it's a shiny squirrel in front of them. So they just want to spend it because that's the impulsivity, the lack of self-control, which I think is part of it for some people. Like this is such a big umbrella too, just like menopause is. And so the way
Yeah.
it manifests people.
Yeah.
Half the
ADHD is a
things,
spectrum.
yeah, it's a spectrum. And half the things you're saying too, I explain away through like I'm a Gemini. It's like there's like astrological things at play. That stuff done. You're also very stubborn and single-minded, right? So that serves you, and it also doesn't serve you when it doesn't serve you because
Right.
you can't be pig-headed all the time. But about the passing of time, also, there's a lot of us, regardless of the diagnosis, because of where we're going astrologically, time is shifting and the way we're experiencing it, just like you said, 5 minutes can be 45 or vice versa. And so I do want to caution people listening also that the experiences that we have with clients and within ourselves, we're sharing these stories to be thought-provoking, not diagnostic. We're not doctors. I'm not a doctor.
No, I am not a doctor.
So, and why I do this podcast and why you do yours is to share our wealth of knowledge based on the experiences we have and the clients we see and that, anecdotal evidence as well. And then allow people to say, well, that kind of sounds like me, or that might sound like my child. I'm going to investigate. So my question to you is, what was the aha moment that made you want to investigate? Because out of all the things you could have thought you might have, it could have been a lot of other things.
Yeah. So the first time I tried to talk to a doctor about it, I was 19. I just knew I was really struggling. I had heard of ADHD, but at that time it was really kind of thought that it was just boys and adolescent boys and that a lot of them grew out of it. And I'm like, well, that's not me, obviously. And when I was in for something else and he said, well, is there anything else you want to talk about while you're here? And I was like, well, yeah. And then when I was trying to explain it, it felt like mush coming out of my mouth. I'm like, how do I explain this? And I didn't even know what it was. I just knew I really struggled with focusing. I struggled with like longer term, like reading comprehension. Like I could understand something when I was reading it, but then if you ask me 30 minutes later, my brain was sort of like, I don't know. Things that like a lot of my other friends didn't struggle with. And just getting things done. I just was struggling with stuff. And he was like, nah, you're fine. You're in college now. And I was always given some version of, you just have too much on your plate or you're fine. And I had tried to talk to doctors about it probably like 3 or 4 times over the years. And it just And I would look at my friends and say, well, they do this and they don't have ADHD, so I'm probably fine. Only to find out later they did have ADHD. They just didn't know it either. We find our people, I'll tell you
Right.
that much.
Yeah.
And so when the last time I had brought it up to a doctor before my diagnosis was about 11 years before that. I had just had my son like 9 months before that, and I was really struggling. And I knew what he was going to say before he even said it. Was like, well, you have a kid now. And I was like, okay, fine. I guess I just don't adult well, was really what it kind of came down to. And then when I got into my 40s, I started to get really depressed because I was just, I thought I would be so much farther along in my life, and especially in terms of my career more than anything. I was really happy with my husband and my kids, but I just struggled with so many other things. And I thought, is this really all I'm capable of? I just thought I would do so much more with my life. And then COVID hit. And like a lot of women, when all of a sudden all of our worlds converged into one place, it was a lot harder to fake it till you make it, right? And I I'd been avoiding TikTok. It had become a big thing and I was avoiding it because that's the exact kind of thing I'd get addicted to. But then my husband ended up on it. So then of course I ended up on it and I ended up almost immediately in ADHD TikTok. And it
Mhm.
wasn't the obvious signs of ADHD. It was the not so obvious signs like out of sight, out of mind, and that included people. That was a big one. Also, anecdotal communication. So, you're talking with a friend, they're complaining about something that their spouse did. You've been through something similar with your spouse. So you start to tell them what happened with them. That's your way of trying to connect with them, but they think you're trying to take over the conversation. And I was like, oh, yeah, I've communicated that way my entire life. So my whole life, I thought I was, connecting with people and people thought I was an asshole. Okay, good to know. I thought, well, I'm not self diagnosing myself from TikTok videos. And I'm in a mastermind with two women. And one day, I don't know what I did, but I said, oh, sorry, I think I might have ADHD, kind of half joking. And one of the women in there said, I actually think you do. And I think it's why you struggle so much. And I think you're always going to flounder until you get this figured out. Turns out she had ADHD. She had also been diagnosed late and she saw me just drowning. But it was COVID. Nobody was seeing anybody in person at that point. And so I ended up doing it through an online company, but it got the ball rolling. It was almost anticlimactic. Like I would have been more surprised if they had said I didn't have it. But it also was this huge relief. I was like, oh, you know what? I can stop taking all these stupid personal development courses I've spent thousands of dollars on because they're not meant for me. They don't work for my brain. That explains a lot. So there was a lot of almost relief. And also, I don't know what to do next. Like, I don't know what to do with this information. And at that time, there wasn't anybody out there for somebody like me. Everything was geared towards boys and adolescent ones. And there was nothing for middle-aged women. So it was rough in the beginning, but I felt so validated by that diagnosis. It just made my entire life make sense. I did go through a period where I was like, but what if they're wrong? Maybe I really am just lazy, but it really answered so many of the questions that I had in my life. And a few months later, my friend that had said that in the meeting about how she thought I had ADHD, she reached out. She's like, you haven't started meds yet, have you? And I was like, is it that obvious? And she's like, a little bit. She said, I don't think you're going to need that much. And I'd heard horror stories about, addiction and all these other things. And she's like, that's just not how it works for our brains. She goes, just talk to your doctor about it. So I finally did. And I said, okay, let me try. Let me just see what happens. And it completely changed my life. I know not everybody can do it. Not everybody wants to do it. And I do feel it is a very personal choice. I never will say, oh, I won't work with you if you're not medicated. I think it is a very personal choice, but I want people to make that choice based on real information and not what they heard in the 80s, which is what I was doing.
Mhm. Yeah, like the class of drugs have come a long way. There's lots of different options, the long acting, the
Yes.
short acting. And okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And good for your friend for sort of calling you out on it.
Yeah.
And you just said something eye-opening again and I've actually changed the way I speak in groups in the following way. I do like to connect my stories with other people's stories. And I don't consider that trying to take over a conversation. I really do consider that connecting, right? And I also know where that comes from just in the work that I do, my innate insecurity of not having anything to contribute if I'm not smart enough or whatever,
Yeah.
enough. So when I can sort of connect a dot to somebody else in a group, that excites me and it makes me feel like I'm contributing. My husband pointed out just kind of what you echoed, that not every, although he presented it, not everything is about you. Like you don't
Mhm.
always have to try to, fit yourself into the scenario just because you might have the same experience. And so of course I got annoyed and I got really, you know, it hurt my feelings. And I was like,
Yeah.
because I knew that's not where I was coming from. So what I do
Yeah.
now is I'm listening to people and, you get that charge of like, oh, I know what this is about. But I'm not gonna zoom out of my chair. So I'll say, would you mind if I share something? Or do you want me to share something? And they'll say yes or no, right? So I walk
Mhm.
into it differently. So I'm grateful that he brought it up, although I didn't really like what he had to say at the time.
Yeah.
But it's true. And again, it's like trying to sort of parse through what is just who we are because we like people and we like to connect with people versus what is out of our control that we work with maybe in a new way. So we touched on this and I want to touch on it again. The gift of having a diagnosis, like you said, is a relief. But the knee jerk reaction I feel sometimes of receiving any diagnosis is the excuses,
Mhm.
right? So I'm going to give myself a pass because I've got ADHD. I can be a jerk because I can't shut up. I don't have to listen to you because I can't focus anyway. So it's not an excuse bucket. It's power people to take charge of how they can. I love that about
Mhm.
you. We both do that, empower women especially.
Mhm.
So yeah, do you want to touch on that? Because I'm
Yeah.
sure that comes up, the shame and the blame, the victimhood
Ab
versus, let's go there.
I think in the beginning, there's several things at play when you first get that diagnosis. It is easy to fall into that, I can use this as an excuse bucket, right? And the thing I tell people all the time is ADHD is an explanation. It's not an excuse. So you can say, like, if you forget to return a text, because God knows I have done that. I don't at this point even bring up my ADHD. I'm like, oh, sorry, I wrote back in my head and I actually forgot to send it to you. But sometimes what you can do is you can say, sometimes I struggle if I forget to write something down. I'm working on a system so that I am better at doing that. Do you mind if you forgot to do something for somebody, do you mind if I do it now? Kind of a thing. So you're explaining that there is something behind it, but you're also taking responsibility. Like, I'm working on a system. I clearly messed up on this. I think in the beginning, that's a very normal response because I have had people say, I feel like after I got my diagnosis, my ADHD got worse. And I'm like, I don't think it actually got worse. I think number one, you just unconsciously started unmasking a little bit because that diagnosis gave this validity, right? This is a real thing for you. It's not just maybe I'm just lazy, right? Now you know what it is. And so there's an unconscious masking that starts to happen. And also because we have worked so hard to be quote unquote normal, that when you find out you're neurotypical or you're neurodivergent, your body kind of goes, "Oh, thank God." And so I think there is a little bit of that. I don't know that it's really like a conscious, I'm using this as an excuse. Eventually, though, what happens is that you do get pushback from people if that happens. I think the other thing that happens, though, is that a lot of times it isn't that they're blaming their ADHD for things. A lot of times I think people are naming it because they're discovering it along with everybody else in a lot of ways. Like
Mhm.
before my diagnosis, I didn't really know that all or nothing thinking was a big component of ADHD or rigid thinking was. I didn't know that struggling with eye contact can also be contributed to ADHD. I had only heard that when it came to autism. That emotional dysregulation, I had no idea emotional dysregulation was part of it. And that was actually one of the things that I was so surprised was so effective with my medication was how much it helped me with that. I was really surprised by that. So I was learning along with everybody else. I was like, oh, that's my ADHD. Oh, and that's ADHD. And it wasn't, I was blaming it. I was just sort of saying, oh, this is part of this. Okay. I don't know
Right.
what to
So
do
like
with this yet.
naming, I like that naming versus blaming. So there's a
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah, there is a difference.
Explaining versus excusing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're you mentioned something too earlier, and I'm glad I'm remembering to circle back because I didn't write it down. So good for me. Um,
Yay.
addiction,
Mm,
because the body with ADHD, I find, is so wired, right? Is there in your research and your experience, do you find there's more addiction, for example, pot or alcohol to sort of numb it down because you're buzzing so high. Uh, I don't know, does
It
that come up?
Oh, yeah, addiction, we are at a much higher rate of risk for addiction
Yeah.
than a neurotypical person. It's not even necessarily because of that, but because our brain is low on dopamine. When the brain is low on dopamine, it is always looking for dopamine. So that can show up in food, shopping, gambling, sex, and then obviously drugs, alcohol, that kind of stuff. So it can show up in a lot of places. How it was explained to me in terms of why it works differently for people with ADHD is so like, there's kind of a running joke that like I need a reminder on my phone to remember to take my afternoon dose anyway. My morning one's now pretty part of my routine. But if my routine is off in the morning, I spend
Mhm.
the whole morning going, did I take my meds? I don't remember if I took them, right? Which is not typical if you're an addict. If you don't have ADHD and you take a stimulant medication, that's where addiction really becomes much more likely. But
Mhm.
how it was explained to me is in people with ADHD, our reticular activating system is understimulated. And so what the medication does is it obviously increases dopamine levels. And the reticular activating system is sort of like the motherboard of the brain, is what I call it. So it just brings that up to what everyone else calls base level, or at least close to that. And so people with ADHD don't have a sense of accomplishment when we finish something. Very often we're just relieved it's over. And that is because we don't have the dopamine. Dopamine is what gives you that sense of accomplishment. And so when we finish something, any dopamine we get from that just sort of brings us up to maybe base level, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So, and when I started taking medication, I heard people say, oh, my brain's so quiet. And I honestly have never been able to say that part. But without medication, my brain is like dumpster fire anarchy. There's just so much going on up there, so much chaos. And I'm running around trying to put out fires. I'm pretty sure I started. But with medication, it's more like a well-run three-ring circus. Like there's still a lot going on up there, but it feels manageable. I don't feel as overwhelmed by it. And that's one of the things that makes things more doable for me because I'm not just in my head all the time trying to make sense of everything. I just feels more streamlined and it's even somewhat entertaining, right? So this is why you do need to get a really good assessment. And the other component of this I'll throw in is very often people who have had severe trauma will present with ADHD like symptoms. There is a lot of debate out there right now about whether or not it is actually ADHD or whether it just presents like ADHD. Right now, I am still in the camp of it presents like it, largely because if you don't have ADHD, as I mentioned before, and go on stimulant medication, you are at an increased risk for addiction. And so I would rather them err on the side of this isn't really ADHD, it just presents like it versus the other way because of that. And also, there are other things involved. I interviewed a woman once who she has ADHD, but she was at like this ADHD support group thing with her therapist. It was a group therapy thing. And everybody was going around kind of telling their stories and everybody's, nodding. It was her turn. And, she goes in at first, everybody's nodding their head. And then I started talking about how, how like you can't read like financial forms or street signs and everyone's head went from this to like shaking their head no. And they're like, wait, what? It turns out she had two binocular eye disorders, and that was actually causing a lot of her ADHD symptoms, like brain fog, overwhelm, fatigue, all this stuff that she just assumed it was part of her ADHD. She goes, I definitely have ADHD because this doesn't cause time blindness, but it just added another layer. So she was going through all this like eye therapy and stuff. It's been really interesting. Yeah. So it is really important to get an assessment. But with women, it's tricky because unfortunately, there are still a lot of doctors out there who think that it doesn't happen to women. Or if you have a master's degree, you couldn't possibly have ADHD, which
Or
is not
you're in menopause, so it's your hormones or,
right. Exactly.
it doesn't have to be either or. It could be both and, right?
Yes, exactly. So you have to make sure that whoever you are seeing, interview them ahead of time if you can. Be like, tell me how ADHD presents in women versus boys or men, because it's different. Our hyperactivity isn't always physical. Like, we tend to think of like little boys running around with too much sugar in their system, but it can be being chatty. It can be interrupting. It can be, like the bouncing leg kind of thing. Like that is part of it. And it can be the racing thoughts. That can be part of ADHD. So they need to know that because what happens a lot is that women will go in, they'll talk to their doctor, and the doctor will be like, oh, I think it's just anxiety. And I can't tell you how many women I have met who were diagnosed with anxiety and or depression for years and said, I kept telling my doctor the medication's not really doing anything. Only for them years later to finally get diagnosed with ADHD, go on the right meds, and their whole life changed. And so it's so important for women to really kind of go in. I have a form that if anybody wants it, I can give you a link to this. It's an adult ADHD self-report form, and it asks you lots of questions about what your symptoms are that you can give to a doctor. So
Love
you
that.
don't have to try and remember everything because,
Mm.
of course, the minute I would go in, my brain would go blank. But also a little more official, and they know you're taking it seriously. But it is a make sure that you do get the proper assessment when you can. Now, it is cost prohibitive sometimes for people.
Yeah.
Like I said, I did mine through an online company. It wasn't the most thorough one, but it was a good one nonetheless.
I want to talk about, so we've talked a lot about this is the real and the woo. So I want to get a little
Hmm.
woo on you. And we discussed, and I'll bring this up here, exercise and mindfulness and yoga and practices like that help to alleviate some of the symptoms of ADHD and so many other things as well, right? So again,
Yeah.
seek your diagnosis, take your medication, and for people who are interrupting, for people who are in the shame game or the blame game, for people who don't know how to take deep breaths, don't understand the connection of a body at rest isn't a body being lazy. It's a body in
Hmm.
reset. And mindfulness and the deep breathing that yoga provides and the way we link our movements with our bodies is like taking a drug. It is for me and so many others that I know, it is like the best kind of alcohol without any calories. And it does become a little addicting in that you feel so good from it because you've been breathing and your mind is at rest. So yoga really helps train that monkey mind. So it's interesting. Did I find yoga because I had ADHD or vice versa? Either way, I'm so grateful that I did. I've always been active. I've always been athletic. And I've always had my motor running and my bouncing
Yeah.
leg and my fingers drumming on the table, and my mouth
Oh.
flapping like it is now. And but the 1-2 punch of good medical care diagnosis with good mindfulness spirituality practices, I have to say, can't be discounted either. So do you
Oh,
have
I
those kinds of practices for yourself?
I do, and I completely agree. My best combination is medication with exercise. Exercise on its own, it has never been enough. The medication is fine, but I find that I just am much better when I have the two combined. I did transcendental meditation training because I really wanted to learn how to meditate. And of course, this is prior to my diagnosis. I went to the training. I said, I just can never make my brain stop. Like I don't know how to like make my brain stop. And she said, the mind is designed to think. It's okay that it thinks. She's like, you just want to sort of let the thought go and then go back to your word because they give everybody a word and you're not supposed to tell anybody what the word is. I'm pretty sure we all have the same word. But anyway,
But you
but
wouldn't know because you're not
we
supposed
would
to say.
know, right? That's why they don't want you to tell anybody. So you just go back then to that word. So it's a nonsense word. It doesn't make anything. But just her saying that, like your mind was designed to think, that took a lot of pressure off when it came to meditation because I just thought, oh my God, I will never be able to do this if I'm supposed to like be levitating basically at some point. So I always say I meditate, maybe not the way God intended, but I do it the way that works for me. And I am a big fan of that. I will also say I have a love-hate relationship with yoga. I love it and I hate it, largely because I am not a naturally flexible person. And no matter how long I've been doing yoga, my heels are never going to hit the ground with down dog.
That's okay. You're
And
not
I have,
supposed to.
and
We
I
still
have
practice.
exactly, and I have become okay with that. But it's funny, I have talked to so many people with ADHD that are like, I want to like yoga, but it's so boring. And I'm like, I know. And I said, I felt the same way, but I knew what the benefits were of it. And I wasn't doing it nonstop, but was on and off for a long time. I'm by no stretch of the imagination a yogi. It's part of my routine. It's in there 1 or 2 times a week, along with strength training, along with cardio. And I'm like, well, you don't have to be able to put your legs behind your head or any of that stuff. It's more about getting you to just focus on what's hurting in the moment, as opposed to your head being like, how can I let this go? I don't want to say pain because you should never feel pain, but if there's
Right.
discomfort, right?
Right. And the part of the practice is being comfortable with discomfort. And so
Right.
living in a body with this diagnosis, we're constantly living with some discomfort, whether it's too many thoughts or scatterbrained mentality. Um, I'm so sorry that you found yoga boring. I have to say, I can probably count on one hand boring yoga class. All has to do with the teacher. I'm a teacher that plays
Yes.
music in class. It brings me joy. So maybe you just need to try a different teacher and
I
have a
like it.
class.
I like it now. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
when I first started. I'm like, oh my God, how do people do this? Oh my God. But I was trying to do it by myself. Then I went to a class and I was like, okay, this is different. I was like, okay, I'm not the only one who sucks at this. This is great. Okay. And then I couldn't always afford it. So I would go when I could. And then I actually did, what's the hot yoga one called? I can't remember. Bikram.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
There was one that was down the street in Chicago and they were doing like this 30 days unlimited. And I went from not being able to even barely touch my calves to being able to like be flat palmed with my hand. I was like, I haven't done this since I was a gymnast. And it was amazing. I can't do it anymore, but it was nice to just try different ones. The other one I would like to try is the Ashtanga because it's more physical. I think I would actually like it better, but there's a lot of good that comes with yoga. So even if I'm not loving my practice that day, it's absolutely worth doing because it just slows me down. Because I'm always like, go, 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 go. And sometimes you need that thing that is going to bring you in and force you to slow down a little bit. And
Yeah.
we're not going to explode if we slow down. Sometimes it feels like it, but we're not. So all the things that you mentioned are all really great for people with ADHD because we need to find the self-care that will work for us.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not what you expect, you know?
And now it's time for Joy on the Fives. Jori Houlihan, in this moment, besides this conversation, what is bringing you joy?
Oh, what is bringing me joy right now is the weather we have been having. It has
Okay.
been bright and sunny, and I go outside so with my bare feet, which a lot of times this time of year you can't do that anymore. So it just gives me so much joy to be outside when it's beautiful and sunny out.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. My segment is all about cultivating more joy in our regular day. And some people need to set an alarm and remind themselves to find it. So thank you for sharing.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of the grounding and bare feet, and that brings me joy.
Yes.
As does this conversation, but often I find when I spring it on my guests, they're like, I like doing this. I'm like, well, that's great. I like doing it too, but what else? What else brings you joy? So tell everybody how to find you. Is there anything we didn't touch on yet that you'd like to highlight before our time is done?
I do want to touch on one thing because you have mentioned menopause in this. So dopamine levels are directly connected to estrogen levels.
Remind everybody, what is dopamine and what does it do?
Okay, so dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and it is the neurotransmitter that gets you to do the thing. It's what gives you a sense of accomplishment. It's what gives you motivation. Neurotypical people get a hit of dopamine just thinking about completing a task, which must be very nice for them. We don't get that. Um, and without it, and then dopamine is converted into norepinephrine, which is what fires the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe works as it, in terms of for ADHD purposes, we'll talk about the frontal lobe works as a filter, number one. So, we're inundated all day long with information we don't need to know on a conscious level. And a properly working frontal lobe will take that 99% we don't need to know and put it in your subconscious somewhere. So only the really important things get through. And then the rest of the brain says, oh, that got through. It must be important. We need to pay attention to it. But if your frontal lobe isn't working properly because you don't have enough dopamine, then how well do you think that's firing? Probably not as well. So way more information gets through. Meanwhile, the rest of the brain is still saying, oh, that got through. It must be important. We need to pay attention to it, which is in part one of the reasons we are so easily distracted and struggle to regulate our attention. And so when you are somebody who maybe has always been very organized and you've always been on time, you've never struggled with any of those things, you've always had really good executive functioning, and suddenly you find yourself in your 40s and 50s really struggling with those things, that's more than likely menopause versus ADHD. For women who have struggled with all this stuff, like I said, like since grade school, that's more where I would say at least go get an assessment. It still could just be menopause, but that is a distinguishing factor because again, dopamine is linked to estrogen. So when our estrogen drops, for women who still have a cycle, they will say, my ADHD symptoms get so much worse the week before my cycle. And that's because that's when your estrogen is at its lowest. And so the medication just doesn't work the same way because your estrogen is so much lower. Well, when you go obviously into menopause, your estrogen is going away. And so if you're already at a deficit, it's even though many women now are realizing it because just everything is so much worse than it used to be. Whereas for women functioning, properly, when all of a sudden their estrogen starts to drop, then they kind of suddenly like, God, am I losing my mind? And they're
Mm.
losing things and they're forgetful. But that's because their dopamine is dropped as well. So I'm always like, welcome to how I've lived my entire life.
And there can be so much to explain just the mental fog in general. And how you describe the filter and the frontal lobe, I love because those of us who are also empaths, we take in everything and feel everything. And so, again, it's just like, is that ADHD? Is that spirituality? Is that intuition? Is it menopause? So the question becomes the questions are the questions, but the answers become up to us to discover and determine with good inquiry. I love that you want to share this form also for people. I would definitely put that in my show notes. And just again, what I do in my business with custom design wellness is I help women, especially, but all humans, become curious about who they are and why they're functioning or not functioning, behaving or misbehaving, loving their life or not loving their life. So when we understand how we're made, then we can be more aligned with who we are or where we'd like to go. In combination with what you do is you're also helping people understand how they're made with the diagnosis they have, and also helping them discover and determine maybe bits and pieces of what might still fall into that diagnosis bucket. So I love that, how we really do work very well together.
I agree. And I like how you said that yours is about making them curious about their life. I'm constantly telling my clients, I want you to look at this through the lens of curiosity, not
Absolutely.
judgment, because they'll
No.
look at it as something, oh, I failed. I'm like, no, this is just data. This is just information for you.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're struggling to get started with something, let's ask questions. So, okay, I'm feeling resistance to this. What's happening here? There's no judgment with this. It just is what it is. And what I tell people all the time is neurotypical people were born with a PC brain, but we were born with Macs. But having the Mac brain isn't the problem. The problem is that we were given the PC manual to work with. So
Exactly.
you've been taking all these personal development courses and professional development and read all these self-help books, but they weren't designed for how your brain works if you have ADHD, because none of them take time blindness into consideration and executive dysfunction. Suddenly understand that part of it. Then it's like, okay, let's write your manual now for how it works for you. And that's what I do with them.
You're stepping on my toes a little because I'm writing a book, and the signature workshops I do are called We Do Come with Instructions. My goal in those workshops is to help people rewrite their instruction manual. I have to collab. I think we'd
So
be the
much.
most hilarious, most entertaining facilitators ever on the planet.
Oh, wouldn't we? I think we'd be amazing.
Jory, this has been so illuminating and interesting and fun. And I wish you so much success in your business. Again, tell everybody who you are, the name of your business, what you're doing, and how to find you.
Yes. So I am Jori Houlihan, and I I am a life coach for women with ADHD, helping them figure out how their brains work. You can find me at jorihoulihan.com, and most things, my handle is at Jori Houlihan. So I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Substack, you name it. So I'm pretty easy to find with that. And the podcast is called ADHD and with Jori Houlihan. If you're looking it up, type in Jori Houlihan and then ADHD because I come up much faster.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I had a really good time.